Hello, today we're going to talk about motivation. We're going to be actually looking at a lot of historical motivation theories. So I'm not going to cover all of the things that I have in the slide deck. I'm going to post it separately, and there are slide notes under each because it's a lot of content. It would be a very long recording, but I want to touch on some of the highlights and the overview stuff. So employee motivation, human motivation, is one of the vast areas of research in leadership and in the field of organizational behavior. Why? Because we want to know what makes us tick, what motivates us to perform well, bring good personality to the workplace, be encouragers of other people, be encouragers of our leaders, be good leaders. So understanding what motivates us towards work. You know, I come from a working class family. My parents have a high school education. And, you know, my father, I think, missed 2 or 3 days of work his entire career. He was a carpenter at an oil refinery, nasty conditions. When he died, he had asbestosis of the lungs. But he loved work. He loved to go to work. He'd go in early, an hour and a half early, to play cards with his buddies. So was he motivated by money? No, we were always a family of 6 trying to make ends meet. But he had purpose and he had relationships. And so if you look at the Daniel Pink book, not so much autonomy, but he did have mastery and he did have purpose. And I would add to Daniel Pink that, relationship, which we're going to look at here. So, yeah, it wasn't just motivated by a paycheck, but he had to feed a family of 6, and that was, part of it. So for years, we've always assumed that it was all about money and all about rewards. And it was only until probably the 1960s when you started to see the field of leadership theories move into psychology and influenced by the psychological disciplines that we started to really understand that employee motivation was not transactional. So as we've evolved, away from transactional leadership, we've also evolved our thinking in employee motivation. So motivation theories fall into some clusters. We're going to look at just a couple. I'm going to talk about the content theories that are in them. And I think there's 1 or 2 that I might speak at in depth. And then process theories. And then we'll touch briefly on organizational rewards. And then I'll leave you to be reviewing, giving feedback, because quite frankly, I find a lot of that very, you've heard it before, and you do it. And then for those of you that work in the nonprofit sector, I often get asked, how do you motivate volunteers? And should they be treated differently than the employees? So I've added a couple bits on that towards the end. But yeah, so let's look at some motivation theories. Motivation, psychological process that arouse and direct goal-directed behavior. Does high motivation mean better job performance? Yes, in theory. Is money the only motivator? No, obviously, and you know that. So, and I'm wrong, motivation does not necessarily mean better job performance. There's a lot of things that go into job performance. So motivation and job performance are not synonymous, because motivation is only one of several determinants of job performance. So just because individuals perform a task well does not mean they're highly motivated to perform it. And again, the Daniel Pink material starts to dissect some of that, which I found fascinating. So for those of you who are coming from Christian organizations or who are interested in this, you can freeze frame here, or you can download the PowerPoint deck and look up some of these passages. So our question here is, what are Christ's assumptions about what motivates his followers? Because he does have an expectation about our motivation as we follow him. And so I give some of my thoughts on those, but I'll leave you to look those up on your own time. And then there are some of my summarized, thoughts from those passages that you look up. So what are the roots of motivation theories? We've got needs. We are motivated by unsatisfied needs. Reinforcement. Behavior is controlled by consequences. Cognitions, our behavior is a function of beliefs, expectations, values, and other mental cognitions. The job characteristics, the task itself is the key motivator. And as you go through, the Daniel Pink video, listen for some of these, because he's building on some of these early thoughts. And then feelings and emotions. Motivation is a function of your feelings, your emotions towards a multitude of interests and goals that you have. So it's not just the task at hand, it's the people that you're working with, it's your position in the organization, lots of things. Okay. Theories of motivation. As I said, they fall into two categories. You've got content theories, which identify internal factors influencing motivation, okay? And then you've got process theories, which identify the process by which internal factors and cognitions influence motivation. So some of these you will recognize. I'm keenly, Maslow is just so intuitive to me, but we still see it alive and well in daily life. I think I'd love for you to zero in and pay attention to Herzberg's motivator hygiene, because that is also one that we tend to overlook. We assume that certain things motivate people when in fact those are just baseline things. We'll talk about that in a second. So there is no one best motivation theory. When you think about adaptive leadership, when you think about leadership of your department, it needs to be contextualized for the different people on your team based on their personalities, their strengths, their skills. So too it is with motivation. You need to learn how, what it takes to motivate people differently, because it's not all the same. Leadership is not an easy gig. I keep telling you that. So Maslow's hierarchy, we all learned this in Psychology 101. I'm not going to go through it. But what they found was that until you can satisfy the needs at the lower levels, you can't continue to progress up. So if I have a physiological need, if I'm hungry, if I'm thirsty, if I need shelter or air, I'm not going to be paying too much close attention to the higher level needs like safety and security and love and esteem. And so we tend to all want self-actualization. It's quite a privileged class and a privileged country to all want to be living up in the self-actualization, when in fact so many people around the world, I would say poverty is shifting in the right direction in some ways. So let's say 80% of the people around the world are living day to day trying to satisfy their physiological needs: food, water, air, and shelter. No, 80% might be too high. Yeah, so theory is you move up the level of needs. When your safety needs can be met, then you start to look towards having your love needs met. When your love needs are met, you start to look towards having your esteem needs met. As soon as you lose any one of those things, you go back down to the bottom of the pyramid, so the theory goes. Let's see. One thing I don't think we talk enough about in org behavior theories and leadership theories is the fact that our needs change at various stages in the organization. This is dated information. It would be very interesting to go back and look now at millennial studies and Gen X studies, because I actually think the 35 and younger category, some of those things would be slightly different perhaps today. Autonomy seems to rank quite high with the younger generation. A desire for purpose and meaningfulness seems to rank higher. And when I've studied the Deloitte millennial study, they want workplaces that are diverse, that feel more like, the community that they have experienced in the online world, which has been their world for most of their life. So just remembering that employees' needs vary based on where they are in their life stage. And it's not just by age. You could also do this by other life stage, such as people who are raising families, have small children, nearing retirement, etc., looking for, major career shifts. Those are all life stage issues that can be factored in here too. Excuse me. Okay, so some of the content theories, I'm going to let you read through all the first ERG theory. Yeah, I don't see that one as prevalent. McClellan's need theory, desire to accomplish something difficult. You'll hear that come through in the Daniel Pink material. Need for affiliation, the need for power. So this is the one that I've always found very interesting. Herzberg's motivator hygiene model. And so it talks about, in order to not have dissatisfaction, you have to have certain baseline conditions in place before anything you do to motivate can work. So hygiene factors are things like a livable salary, good supervisory relations. Don't have to be great, but basic, they don't hate their boss. Basic good working conditions, so that things that you try to do to motivate them, things like achievement, recognition, responsibility, will actually work. And I have found this just spot on, because when we were baffled by why really low paid employees don't respond well to more responsibility or recognition and rewards, at least not for long term. You might get a short term bump out of it. But if those other things aren't in place, it's very hard to motivate your staff. And so, yeah, you'll hear that in other lecture material that's posted. So zero in on the Herzberg's model when you go back to read these. Basic premise: job satisfaction is not a continuum from satisfied to dissatisfied. Rather, there are two continuums going on: the no satisfaction, and the dissatisfaction, no dissatisfaction. And both have to be satisfied in order to move people along the spectrum. I just found it one of the more interesting theories, to be quite honest. So there you see a longer list of hygiene factors and the longer list of motivators. And so the hygiene factors need to be satisfied before you can actually see any benefit from motivation. Okay, let's go and look at process theories. So those first ones that we just reviewed were content theories. These are process theories. And so it's more, as it says, more about the process of how you are managing the content of people's workplace to then motivate. So there's two here that I find interesting, but Adams' equity theory first. And I want you to think about this because you've taken courses on leadership and justice, if you're not taking it right now. So Adams' equity theory: people strive for fairness and justice in social exchanges. People will be motivated to the extent that their perceived inputs to outcomes is in balance. People compare personal outputs to inputs, compare your outcomes to relevant others. So this is why people in classes exchange what grades they got on papers, which makes me laugh. Teammates compare themselves to one another when it comes to salary, rewards, recognition. Groups compare themselves to other groups. So if other groups get to have flex time and work from home Fridays, why doesn't our group get to experience that? And it always comes down to, well, it depends on who your manager is. But there's a constant comparison going on, which is why organizations need to set some of these standards and expectations for how teams and groups are led. And then when it comes to how you feel you're faring in your career, it's comparing to other people in other fields or other people in your same field in other organizations. So we're constantly striving for some level of balance. You know, a professor who gets 3 months off a year might be fine with a lower salary because they know the benefit of that is that they get 3 months off a year, and that motivates them. They value that component of their job. So they're not comparing themselves to a professor who is in a college that works 12 months a year. So yeah, we're just constantly balancing that. And so in the slide deck, you can go and read through some of the calculations that we do that go into equity theory. And so some of us are keenly sensitive to the perception of organizational justice. And again, I find it a fascinating area to study because it has a lot to do with expectations. It has a lot to do with what you expect from work. Again, my father, he didn't expect a lot. He just wanted to get an honest day's pay for an honest day's work and enjoy the people he worked with. And you know, he was good at his job. So I have always felt like I am a terribly difficult to please person because I'm quite sensitive to fairness perceptions in the organization, and in organizations seem to be inherent places where there's disequity, you know, and even if I'm not the experiencer of the disequity, when I see or know that it's happening, it's like sand in my shoe. I can't ever get comfortable. And I kind of wish that I could, because it would make life easier perhaps, but no. So think about it for yourself. In most situations, do I put in more than I get out, which is totally fine? Do I strive for equity and fairness in terms of my inputs and outcomes, even if I feel positive inequity? Or do I try to put in as little effort as possible to attain desired rewards? I will say in my career, as I've noticed that some people getting rewards, recognition, and putting in very little effort. I have noticed on certain things, if it was a project I didn't really care about, that I pulled back my energy and pulled back my effort. Because I thought, well, why am I the one working myself to death and the other person is being rewarded for that work or recognized for that work? So think about it and think about where that plays out in your own life. So again, we have different equity sensitivity. And here we talk about organizational justice, distributive justice, the perceived fairness of how resources and rewards are distributed, procedural justice, the perceived fairness of process and procedure used to make allocation decisions, and interactional justice, the extent to which people feel fairly treated when procedures are implemented. And so we are all expecting some level of justice from our leaders in the organization and from the systems that the organization has put in place for us to work under. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead because these are quite, like I said, it's a big deck and quite a lengthy. All right. So this is the section on giving feedback. Again, you've heard this piece of SMART making. When you're giving feedback to people, you want to make sure that you're setting goals that are the SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, results oriented, and time bound. And I've given you some notes here to help you think about those even more, because sometimes people have trouble thinking of what each one of those categories means. Why does this feel like it's out of place? Okay. And then again with the process theories, job design approaches to motivation. I've actually used this concept a lot. You've heard of job redesign. When I feel somebody's either reached the peak of their excellence and they seem like they're getting bored, redesigning jobs to give them more challenge, give them more leadership. Or when you have an underperformer, trying to figure out how do you change up the job to make it fit perhaps better to their motivation level as well as their skill set, which would then make them feel more motivated when they can experience that sense of mastery. Very unmotivating experience to never have a sense that you're mastering your work. And obviously, again, that's not going to be a day in, day out reality. But if you constantly are being told that you're missing the mark, or you haven't quite done it right or well, it's very hard to ever find motivation in that kind of environment. So job redesign can help with both your high-end performers and your low-end performers. Okay. And that again is sort of building on the job design, so thinking about the characteristics of the role. All right. Reward system. I won't go deep into this part, but do read through some of it, and again, be thinking about any newer theories, and you'll see how they have been developed and are, these early theories are launching pads for them. So general model of organizational reward system, we have financial, social, psychic, the desired outcomes. We want to attract talent, we want to motivate talent, we want to develop talent, satisfy their needs, and we want to retain talent. So we want to understand what motivates people to keep them. And then the criteria for distributing rewards are things like they are hitting the results that we expect and they're exhibiting the behaviors that we expect. And usually good reward systems is both. So in some companies, you see people who are really cutthroat in their behavior, but as long as they're hitting their rewards, their results, they're kept. And that can be a demotivator to other people in the organization. I've seen organizations that have kept really bad behavior in leaders because they were still excelling in the functions of their role, whether it was fundraising or a high revenue division or hitting all of their nonprofit goals. They were willing to keep somebody who was a tyrant leader or somebody who was perhaps a little too friendly with the opposite sex at work, all for the sake of, hey, they're getting their results and that's all we care about. And those kinds of things speak volumes about organizations. So let me see. All right, I think I'm going to wrap up there because that's quite a bit. But like I said, I'll post this deck. There's slide notes under them so you can skim through and think about some of these things. And then towards the end, I do have some content about motivating volunteers if you work in the nonprofit sector. Okay, have a great day.